And we will start with Simon Ateba from Today News Africa. Simon, please.
Yes, thank you for taking my question, Eva, and thank you for doing this. My question actually goes to all the ministers, Minister Njai of the Gambia, Minister Gwangwe of Malawi, and then Minister Toya of Liberia. I know this week the managing director of the IMF said Africa faces double crisis, trying to recover from COVID-19 and also the war in Ukraine with food increases everywhere. I, I would like you to really talk about the economies of your countries and how all these, the COVID and the war in Ukraine and the food increases, how you are being personally impacted. And if you can also talk a little bit about, how debt vulnerabilities in your own countries. I know last year in 2020 and 2021, the IMF, gave a lot of loans to African countries. So if you can talk about your countries personally and how you are being impacted by current global event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon.
Well, thank you for that important question. In Liberia, the impacts are being felt through increases in the price of fuel and rice. The government, under the first COVID impact, had to suspend 50% of the excise on fuel in Liberia to minimize the impact we were seeing. When the COVID war came, we saw prices skyrocketing again. Inflation in Liberia has had to move by 1.5 basis point, even though they are scheduled to come down back. So the government has lost revenue to protect the vulnerable poor from these impacts. We are also negotiating with rice importers. Liberia has a very strategic history with rice, and so the government has decided that we will not allow the price of rice to go up. We're in discussions here with the World Bank and the IMF on price support mechanisms. So we're feeling the impact in those areas. One of the good things is that the SDR reallocation that happened, Liberia is using some of that to continue to transform its infrastructure, but also to help stabilize the impacts we're seeing. On debt, Liberia is at a moderate risk of external debt. But we do see the debt levels rising across the country. And so the discussion here on the common debt framework is important. It's important for several reasons. The debt suspension initiative has lapsed. I think ministers have been calling for an extension, for a new initiative. But also part of the framework has to be that, when countries go through these initiatives, they face the risk of potential downgrade. The rating agencies see them as reneging on debt obligations. We have to have a conversation such that if COVID impacts on the country's ability to service its debt and it participates, it should not be viewed negatively. I think that should be part of the framework. Also, the broader framework on non-differential treatment of debt countries has been a concern raised by some finance ministers, and I believe that we continue to have that conversation with the fund. So yes, debt is rising. Liberia is at moderate risk of external debt and high risk of total debt. And I think we join the chorus on looking at how we address Africa's debt problem, particularly since this is a private sector challenge. The reason countries borrow is to grow their private sector. So we're glad that the fund is taking a new look through the RST and in the way that the fund did the catastrophic container relief trust and under the poverty reduction growth trust. Those are mechanisms that have helped countries. We're glad that the fund is standing with African countries to deploy these solutions across countries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think just to do an extension from my colleague here, for Malawi specifically, I think beyond the energy price escalation and perhaps also beyond the food inflation, there is one thing to do with fertilizer imports that again we see as a very direct impact to Malawi as an economy. We are an agrarian economy, and most of our people do rely so much on imported fertilizers, and a good chunk does come from Russia. and already we are seeing a spike in the prices of the farming inputs, most especially the fertilizer as it is. You know, most of you, that we do run a subsidy program for farm inputs called agricultural input subsidy or inputs program. And our hand has been forced now to scale it down significantly, at least by a third, because of the anticipated prices in fertilizers going forward. And again, now perhaps reforming the whole system, now requiring a little bit more of the farmer contribution to the subsidy being increased as it is. And at a time when as a government we would need to be doing more to cushion the people, we find ourselves in a situation where the whole thing becomes unsustainable, and we need to relook at the whole subsidy program, so to speak, and we know that it will affect our people, especially those that are most vulnerable. But beyond the Russia-Ukraine shock, I think one shock which we should also be able to highlight specifically for Malawi is the issue to do with the cyclones. We just coming out of a recovery from a cyclone Idai. And before we actually concluded the recovery from that cyclone, we've actually been hit by two more cyclones, big ones this season. Most significant one being the cyclone Anna, which the initial estimate is that it has wiped out about 2.7% of our GDP, especially in two sectors, the road infrastructure sector, but also the energy infrastructure. As we speak, a hydro plant that gives us not less than a third of our generation capacity is down as we speak due to these cyclones. So I would say that yes, we're rearing on these shocks after shock. COVID is not completely out of the picture yet, and then we continue being subjected to more and more shocks as it is. And when you look at all this, a government needs to be present, a government needs to work with its people, and you can only do that by doing the best you can as a government to cushion those that are most vulnerable to these shocks. And all that eats into your fiscal. Just to say that the hikes in the energy prices, our hand again has been forced to start looking at some of the duties that go on into the price build-up of the pump prices, some of the levies that have been a lifeline for other investments in road maintenance and other investments related to that sector. We've been forced to now remove some of those levies so that we're able to cushion the citizenry. But then the question always is, for how long can you do that? Because the ammunition that is at our disposal is limited, especially as a smaller economy, so to speak. When you put A plus B, it now goes on into your own debt levels to see exactly now how you fund some of these decisions as you try to cushion your people. And I would echo what my colleague has said, that issues to do with the G20 common framework should really start ticking, because talk has been heard. It's action that really now needs to go on the ground, because the longer this takes, then we'll be looking at more debt distresses in many, many countries, not only in the sub-Saharan region. You're now hearing of this problem really being felt beyond the sub-Saharan region. You're hearing it from many other countries as it is. And I would think creative ways of coming up with solutions to debt sustainability issues should be at the center of the discussions at a forum like this one at the IMF. Let me leave it there for now.
Thank you. In my opening remarks, I did mention that the last 2 years showed how exposed we are from the global supply chain to the design of our national economies. Let me be country specific. The Gambia is among the leading importers of fertilizer and wheat from Ukraine. And what is happening now is that our system in terms of the supplies, we have to shift and look for new sources of importing. The fertilizer we have been subsidizing, meaning that even the importation of wheat and other commodities, in response to the crisis, we had to take off from the, in terms of the fiscal policy, 20% of the CIF value. Fuel, we're also subsidizing. Our debt GDP ratio currently is almost 84%, down from 129%. To put it into perspective, what it means is that in responding to the fiscal, the exogenous shocks, it is also undermining our own recurrent budgets. We had to really execute austerity measures that should be able to contain the expenditure, whilst the international trade taxes was also affected. How do we balance up this? Despite the ongoing efforts as government to make sure that there is price stability, inflation has actually increased, although we are still under a single digit. Our interest rates has also been contained in the sense that both our monetary and fiscal policy, despite the shocks, have been able to withstand and cushion the impact. But is it sustainable? No. This is why the call for the extension of the DSSI from our end, regionally and continent-wise, is very, very, very important. My colleagues did mention how IMF is responding. And indeed, it's been commendable, including the World Bank and other development banks. The bottom line is we are in a situation where when we, at the level of designing, we don't know tomorrow what will happen, meaning that we are on alert 24 hours. What will happen tomorrow, we don't know. But the most important thing is for as a country, as a region, what we can do to make sure that we will have now, what we have learned, the lessons learned, is to try to locally look inwards to see how we can apply the import substitution. We are being forced to a point of price control because of the exponential price increases in commodities. But we are still insisting that the price regularization is the best option, and we still maintain that stance. So in terms of the economic policy management, we are still on, is it sustainable in terms of the subsidies, whilst our revenue sources have been going down. We've also revisited our own fiscal bedroom in terms of the non-tax, which we are now trying to really mobilize local resources in terms of the domestic resource mobilization in order to cushion or to be able to complement what we have lost in taxes on international trade. I'll stop here for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister.